Tonight we journey into a myth lost to Tima tale, not found in any sacred scroll, yet whispered across the winds of ancient mountains. This is the story of Orion, the forgotten son of Hephaestus, though some say Jesus, a demigod not born in Olympus, but in fire and steel, deep within the forge of a mortal blacksmith. His purpose: to steal the eternal flame from Mount Olympus itself, to reignite the dying hearths of humanity. But his path wasn't a simple one. Between era and destiny stood a three-headed guardian of the underworld, a jealous god in winged sandals, and a storm-summoning oracle who foresaw only one ending: Orion's death. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy stories that blend myth with mystery. And hey, let us know in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it, because sometimes our stories are better than sleep, and other times they just make you dream louder. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan if you like, a little background noise, and let's uncover tonight's tale together. In the flickering forge of Mycenae, where men shaped iron with sweat and prayer, there lived a woman whose hands rivaled the gods. Her name was Callista, a mortal blacksmith, with fire in her soul and a hammer that sang with every strike. Her blades could split spears mid-air. Her armor was said to be so seamless, even Ares himself once wore it into battle. The gods noticed, but only one descended. Hephaestus, the outcast god of the forge, watched her from afar. Callista wasn't beautiful in the way of queenship, wore soot like war paint, and smelled of iron and pine smoke. But in her craft, there was something divine, something familiar. One night, under a low red moon over the Aegean, Hephaestus appeared in her workshop, silent, cloaked in smoke. No gifts, no declarations, just presence. The forge flared brighter that night, and 9 months later, a child was born. Irion. He did not cry. His eyes glowed like embers, and the fire leapt in the forge as if it knew him. The midwives froze. One whispered, "He's touched by the divine." Another crossed herself, and the eldest among them muttered, "He won't stay here long." Irion grew fast. At 5, he shaped iron. At 7, he forged his first blade, flawless, warm to the touch. He didn't play. He didn't lie. There was a quietness about him that made the villagers uneasy. They called him cursed, the son of a god with no throne. Children stayed away. Priests refused to bless him. But Callista, she loved him fiercely. She taught him more than smith. She taught him to listen to fire, not command it. By 16, Irion's forge never cooled. He built weapons for kings he'd never meet, but something stirred in him. He wasn't made to serve. He was made to change the world. Long ago, the eternal flame was a gift stolen from Olympus by Prometheus, a fire for thought, for art, for defiance. But that light had dimmed. Humanity forgot the debt, and the gods turned their backs. Hearths faded, forests chilled, crops withered, frost crept in. Even in midsummer, children huddled by cold chimneys. Elders prayed to ashes. Priests spoke of punishment. Scholars blamed the stars. But across empires, deeper fear took hold. The gods had abandoned them, and they were right. On Olympus, the gods had sealed the last true flame, hidden it in a sacred brazier, untouched by mortals for centuries. God dead, share it again. They feared rebellion, feared another Prometheus. Let them suffer, they said. Let them remember their place. But not all gods agreed. In quiet corners, whispers stirred. Dryads spoke of a boy born aflame. Nymphs saw sparks in a boy's eyes from Mycenae. The winds carried a name, Orion, and far away. In the cold stone chambers of Delphi, the oracle dreamed of fire. It walked on 2 legs, lit cities with its footsteps. And in the depths of forgotten temples, candles, long dead, sputtered back to life at the sound of a blacksmith's hammer striking anvil. Orion didn't know, he only felt the shift. The iron grew harder to shape. The flames in his forge needed more breath, and the warmth that once came easily began to slip away. But the world was watching. The gods, both old and silent, turned their gaze to Mycenae, high on Olympus. The eternal flame flickered for the first time in an age, not at a god's command, but at the presence of a boy born of fire and sorrow. And deep inside him, something began to glow. Far from his forge, the city of Delphi was dying. Once the heart of divine council, where kings and warriors climbed sacred paths to hear Apollo's voice. Now it stood quiet. Columns cracked. Springs turned to mist. But one voice remained buried deep. Within the mountain's breath, Irene arrived without a word, no welcome at the gates. The temple torches were cold. Ivy clung to broken altars like fingers, unwilling to let go of lost faith. Thunder growled above, not of rain, but of something older. Watching, he descended into the hollow chamber where generations had once wept and begged, and there, on a crumbling throne of stone, sat the oracle. She wore violet robes, skin pale as ash. Her eyes, blind yet burning with storms. Before Irene could speak, she inhaled sharply like flame pulled back into a lantern. "Irian," she hissed. Though no name had been spoken, he said nothing. "You will climb the mountain. You will take the flame. and you will die." Her voice cracked like a whip through the stillness. Irion didn't flinch. He'd heard stories of oracles' riddles wrapped in poetry, but this wasn't prophecy, this was a sentence. She rose. Her limbs moved like smoke caught in wind. "The gods will oppose you. The world will demand your failure. The flame you seek, it does not belong to mortals. It was stolen once, and the price was eternity." In chains, Irion stepped forward, fists clenched. "Then let me pay the price." Silence. Then laughter, not cruel. Tired, the sound of someone who's seen too many stories end the same way. "You already are," she whispered. Darkness fell. Thunder rolled. The air pulsed with something primal. And just as suddenly, everything went still. The oracle slumped back into her seat, her mouth opened, and only smoke escaped. Her vision was done. Irion left in silence, but her prophecy followed him in dreams, in flame. In every shadow cast by his forge, the gods had spoken. His path was set, but not even Olympus could predict what a dying world would do and handed back its fire to reach the eternal flame. One must first earn the mountain's recognition, and Olympus does not bow to the untested. That they say the base of the mountain isn't stone or snow, but soul. Beneath it lies a gate sealed by silence and guarded by creation's oldest fear, Cerberus, the hound of Hades. No one could pass that gate without first touching death. Irion didn't hesitate. He knew the myths the way blacksmiths know heat closely, warily to claim the flame. He would have to descend, not metaphorically, but into the underworld itself. He didn't prepare with weapons. He prepared with craft. 3 days and nights, he forged a collar not for war, but for submission, obsidian, and the final ember from his mother's forge. Into it, he carved 3 names, one for each of Cerberus' heads: memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th day, he stood before the mouth of a cave, said to Spira, "Downward forever." The wind didn't sting the skin, it scraped the soul, and the air smelled not of rot, but of forgotten prayers. He entered. Down and down again, past bones that glowed faintly, past torches that lit without fire, until he heard it, the breathings low, massive, layered 3 storms, dreaming in unison. Cerberus. In the clearing, the beast slept on ash and bone, its fur darker than absence, its heads twitched, each to its own rhythm. Its eyes were closed, but its ears listened. Irion didn't draw a blade. He knelt and held out the collar, then softly, "Ehummed." That it was the lullaby his mother used to sing, the one that made night feel smaller. The middle head stirred, the left opened an amber eye, right snarled and stopped. They listened. And in that silence, Irion slipped the collar on. Cerberus exhaled, and the gate behind him opened, not with rage, but with respect. Irion had touched death, and death had stepped aside. The road up Olympus was not a road at all. No markers, no stars. Only sheer cliffs, biting wind, and whispers that echoed from nowhere. Irion climbed it with certainty, but with instinct. His mortal hands bled, his divine blood burned. The mountain resisted him at every turn, and then he appeared, not with thunder. Not in light, but in silence. Hermes. The messenger, the trickster, the thief. He stood on a ledge just ahead, dressed like a traveler. Cloak, loose sandals, feathered eyes sharp as broken glass. A crooked grin played across his face. "Well," he said, spinning a coin between his fingers, "I thought you'd be taller." Irion didn't stop climbing. "I know why you're here," Hermes said, appearing beside him, walking without ever lifting a foot. "You want to bring fire back to the mortals. Sweet, noble, stupid." Irion paused. "Then stop me." Hermes chuckled, casual and cool. "Stop you? No, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to make sure you understand the deal. You're walking into the heart of Olympus, into the gods' vault, into a story that was never yours to tell." Irion simply said, "Here I am." That smile, Hermes' ever-present grin, flickered. "You're trying to restore a balance that was broken for a reason," Hermes said. "The flame was a gift once, a mistake, and now the gods guard it like a dragon guards gold, not because it's precious, but because it's dangerous." Irion stared straight into his eyes. Then they've forgotten what danger looks like. For the first time, Hermes' expression darkened. The air shifted. The coin in his fingers vanished. His winged sandals twitched. "You think you're Prometheus," he said coldly, "but you're not even a flicker compared to him." "I'm not trying to be him," Irion replied. "I'm trying to finish what he started." Hermes stepped forward, placed 2 fingers to Irion's chest. "Then, here's my gift." Pain surged, not in flesh, but in something deeper. A thread inside Irion twisted, turned. "The fire you seek," Hermes whispered, "will burn everything you are." Then he was gone. The mountain groaned. Thunder rolled. A storm had begun, not of rain, but of consequence. Irion kept climbing, cursed but unshaken. The curse settled in his chest like frost in the lungs, subtle at first, a tightening when he breathed, a dull heat under the skin. But the higher he rose, the more it bit into him, not like a wound, but like erosion. Piece by piece, the man was being scraped away, leaving something raw behind. Mount Olympus was no longer just a mountain. It was alive. Cliffs shifted beneath his feet. Wind screamed down ravines like the furious howls of forgotten gods. And the higher he climbed, the less mortal the world became. Trees vanished, birds fell silent, even the stars above seemed to pull away. There were no paths, now only jagged ledges, sheer walls, and stone that demanded sacrifice with every step. Orion bled, he slipped. Once he nearly fell, but a sudden burst of heat from deep inside him steadied his grip. The curse Hermes had left had awakened the flame, and still he climbed. He thought of the dying hearths, the children curled against cold brick walls, the mothers huddled in darkness. He thought of Callista, his mother, her hands blistered, still forging warmth for a world that was forgetting what warmth meant. But Olympus had no mercy to give. Storm clouds gathered, lightning danced along the ridges like gods pacing in frustration. He could feel their eyes watching, judging, waiting for him to fall. But it wasn't just the mountain fighting him now, it was Olympus itself. He passed ruins carved into the mountainside, temples long abandoned by faith, crumbled altars, statues of Athena with the eyes chipped out, pillars of Zeus split by silence. And Orion saw what no one dared say aloud. The gods weren't powerful anymore. They were afraid that a mortal might bring fire back without their permission. Afraid that someone not born in their halls could carry the light that wants to find Olympus. And in that fear they threw everything at him. Ice, thunder, visions, voices. But he climbed. With hands torn and heart smoldering, he rose above the clouds, and then he saw it, not carved in marble, not guarded by golden warriors. No trumpets, no divine fanfare, only silence and flame. It stood in the center of a windless clearing atop a blackened stone pedestal. The brazier didn't just look ancient, it looked eternal, older than language, shaped by hands long forgotten. And within it burned the eternal flame. Not red, not orange. White. Blinding. Alive. It didn't flicker, it watched. Orion stepped closer. The heat didn't sear him. It entered him as if it recognized something long lost. His breath caught, his skin prickled. That ember Hermes had cursed into his chest now pulsed like a second heartbeat, calling to the flame like a sibling finally found. He reached out, and time faltered. He saw cities built by firelight. He saw his mother's forge blazing through dead winters. He saw civilizations rising and falling, each one built around fire, and each one forgetting why it burned. And then he saw the punishment. Prometheus chained to stone, his liver eaten daily by a vulture. The gods had called it justice, but Orion saw it for what it was. Fear wearing a crown, heckled, turned back. He could let humanity adapt to the cold, forget fire, forget them. But then he heard the wind whisper her name, Callista, and he remembered who grabbed the flame, and he took him. Pain screamed through his booty, not like burning, like buying ruetin. Bones cracked and reformed. His skin glowed, veins pulsing with. He fell to his knees, roaring soundly as the flame poured into every part of him, erasing the boy, forging the firebearer. He wasn't thwarting it anymore. He was it. The brazier flickered, then dimmed, then went cold. Because the eternal flame was longer chained to Olympus, it had chosen a new vessel. Orion collapsed beside the empty pedestal. Smoke rose from his fingertips, but his eyes glowed like dawn. He breathed barely, but with each breath a wisp of warmth spread outward into the wind, down the mountain toward Worldbeller. He had taken the fire, but not for himself, for everyone. Orion did not walk down Olympus, he carried it with him. The moment the flame entered him, the mountain stopped resisting. Winds fell silent, the sky cleared. Even thunderstone beneath his feet seemed to shift and guide him, not with reverence but with. He was no longer an trespasser, he was a torch. His body smoldered with divine heat, not the kind that scorched, but the kind that stirred life. Wherever his foot touched earth, frost melted with every breath. Thickest wind softened the air of smoke, but of renewal, of rebirth. But he was not whole. His limbs trembled beneath the weight of what hecoried. The eternal flame was not just fire, it was memory. He could feel every spark it had ever ignited. The first campfire in a prehistoric cave, that urge that lit Athens, the forge that built Troy, and he felt the cost of a laugh. He saw the cities burned in its name, the temples razed, the wars fought with stolen fire and ambition. The gift of the gods had never been but this time he would not give it as a weapon. He descended through cloud insolence, past broken statues of gods who had once been worshipped, now crumbling in divine decay. He passed the cave where Cerberus had once guarded Thegate, but the beast was gone, as if even death had stepped aside for what Ariane had become. He reached the world below, and there, in a frozen village where hearths had long turned to ash, Pio plegathered around him, not in fear but in. He did not speak, he simply held out his hand, and a flame danced from his fingertips into the nearest hearth. It roared to life, then another and another. A chorus of warmth spread from home to home, city to city, across lands that had forgotten what it felt like to gather around a fire without praying. Orion burned, his hair shimmered like molten gold, his skin cracked like cooled obsidian. He was dying but not fading. He was becoming something else. He had not stolen that flame, he had become it. And everywhere right burned, the world whispered his name. Not in worship, but in gratitude. No tomb was ever built for Orion, no statue was carved, no songs were sung in temples. There was no procession, no mourning, no final battle to mark his passing, and yet he never disappeared. After the fires returned, strange things began to happen across land. In distant villages where no traveler had passed, hearths lit on own entire forests, once frozen solid, blossomed overnight. Blacksmiths claimed their forges heated faster. Children huddled in the cold told their parents they saw a man of light standing beside the flame before Etros. No one could prove anything, but they all told the same story. He walked until there was nothing left of him to work with. His body had long since cracked and burned, not from weakness, but from transformation. What remained of Orion, bone, blood, voice, had become spark, smoke, heat, and he gave it all away. His mother's forge was the last place oust, old, abandoned, its fires cold for decades. Until one night, a traveler passing through claimed he saw a boy hammering something glowing white at Athena. When he looked again, the forge was empty, but the flame danced high and hot, just like it used to. They say Theagods felt it. That Olympus, sensing it had been stripped of its power, trembled in its silence, but the gods did not strike back. They did not rage. Because even they understood Arion had not challenged them with war or pride, he had reminded them of purpose. And so the eternal flame, once hoarded by immortals, now flickered in every village, every city, every lonely mountain hut. It lived in the warmth of soup shared by strangers, in candles placed by grieving hands, in torches lifted by rebels seeking light in the darkest places. And always, always, they whispered the salmon name Arion. Some say when your fire dims for no reason, it's him passing through. Others say if you listen closely to the crackle of the flame, you'll hear the rhythm of a hammer striking an anvil. Steady, patient, eternal. Because Arion never died, he became warmth itself. Not a god, not a hero, just a boy who gave up everything to help the world remember how to glow. In the land of Sparta, where boys were taught to fight before they could speak, and honor was carved in bone, women were no less fierce. Among them was one whose venom echoed through the marble halls like the clash of steel. Leonthe, daughter of Commander Adrastos, she was born during a blood-red eclipse as omen showed over the city. Midwives whisper at thought. She came from Ari himself. By age 12, she had bested her brothers in the Thrizling ring. By 16, she had led a hunting party into the Titus Mountain, returned with 3 wild boars tied behind her chariot. Leonthe was not just respected, she was feared. She walked through the Spartan agora with a straight spine and quiet steps. Men lowered their eyes. Women watched her with a strange mix of envy and awe. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and her were chosen like arrows, never lost it, but there was something in her thought few noticed. When she removed her armor at night, when the torches dimmed and the world outside fell away, Leonthe would stare at the stars, not with a warrior's challenge, but with wonder. There was a softness buried in her, one that battle could not scorch, ironing, not for marriage, not for conquest, but for something else. Something the Spartan code had no name for: peace, magic, mystery. She never said what she knew was this. Every full moon when the city slowed and Thurier slept, her body pulled her toward the cliffs above the river Eurytus. She would leave behind her spear, her cuirass, her reputation, and become just a woman wandering beneath the stars alone in the world. She thought, must be bigger than Sparta, bigger than swords and pride. She felt it in her blood, like music she couldn't hear, but knew was playing somewhere. And then one night, beneath a sky so silver it looked scraped from the edge of a blade, she saw it gliding across a still pool in a hidden grove, a swan, unmoving, watching her, moonlight rippling on its back, beautiful in a way no warong had ever been. And from that moment on, Leonthe's life began to shift away from blood and battle towards something softer, stranger, and far more. The grove was hidden, untouched by the usual grit of Spartan boots. Nestled between 2 cliffs, it whispered of something older than Sparta, older even than Olympus. The trees curved in crescent arches, their branches low in silver-red by moonlight. A shallow lake lay at the center, still as glass, and on it its feathers shimmered like woven starlight, neither white nor gray, but something in between. It floated with silence of smoke, cutting across the water with no ripple. Its long neck caught gracefully as if sculpted by divine hands, and its eyes, gods its size, held no animal wildness, no fear, only awareness. Leonthe froze at the tree. Her training screamed caution. Nothing in nature moved like this. No creature stood so boldly before a human, but the swan did not flee. It watched her calmly, expectantly. She stepped forward, it tilted its head, Anathor stepped closer. The lake did not stir. She stood at the edge of the water, heartbeat steady but alert, hand restingly on the dagger strapped to her. The swan moved again, slowly, deliberately, toward her. When it reached the edge of the shallows, it stopped and bowed its head slightly. Leonthe knelt. She had seen thousands of things in her life. War camps burning, bloodied warriors screaming at the heavens, newborn calves gasping for their first breath. But never had she seen something so quiet, so still, so enchanted. She reached out. The swan did not resist. Her fingertips brushed its feathers, warm, unnaturally warm. Saw its body, burned with sunlight instead of blood. A feeling stirred in her chest, not fear, not fascination, something older, something she didn't know she'd been missing until that very moment. Connection. The swan blinked once and turned away, gliding back into the center of the lake. Leonth remained, kneeling, watching it, unsure what had just begun, but certain it was no accident. The next full moon returned, so did the swan, and again the next month and the next. No words, no promises, just presence, a ritual born of silence and gravity. By the time autumn settled on the hills, Leonthi no longer questioned we. She just knew the swan would be waiting, and her world would never be. Some seasons turned. Leaves and fell, and grew again. The wars continued far below the hills, but in that moonlit grove, time stood still. Only the full moons mattered now. Only those nights Leonthi had once measured her worth in battle scars, victories, and commands followed with a recitation. But now, something softer guided her, something far older than Spartan law. Each month she returned to the grove with offerings, fresh figs, soft linens, carved trinkets from olive wood. The swan of her eight never acknowledged the gifts, yet Leonthi continued, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. The swan was always waiting. It met her at the edge of the water, dipped its head gently, then glided by her. Sometimes it circled her. Sometimes it simply stood beside her on the shore, its warmth bleeding into the air around it like a hidden sun. She began to speak, not like a soldier, but like a woman who had never been hard before. She spoke of her father's, of how victory never filled the empty space in her chest, of the nights she stared at the sky, wondering if there was more than sword and soil. The swan said nothing, but it listened. She could feel it. Its stillness wasn't silence, it was attention. The kin immortals never gave, the kind no commander, no suitor, no friend had ever offered her. Over time she stopped feeling alone. She braided her hair before each visit, smoothed her robes. Sat beside the swan for hours, shoulder touching wing, saying little yet feeling more than she'd ever felt in a Spartan palace or battlefield. And still, the swan never fooled, never aged, never changed. She should have been afraid. There were stories of gods taking animal form to lure mortals into ruin. Stories of punishments for those who loved Thedivine. But Leonte didn't believe in anymore. She believed in the way her hand fit perfectly along the curve of the swan's neck, in the way it bowed its head when she sang quietly into the night, in the way it seemed to wait for her, need her. No words, no promises, but in their silence something anti-entrecruit. And though she didn't speak word, not even to herself, Leonthi knew what it was. Love. The swan was not born of earth. Its wings had once stretched across this. Its fingers had played the lyre that made the sunrise. Its name hadn't been whispered in temples, carved in marble and shouted in song. Apollo, god of light, of music, of prophecy, nauslant, feathered, bound, long before Leonthi was born. Apollo, who had committed arson in the eyes of Olympus. He had defied Zeus, not with blade or rebellion but with truth. He had spoken against his father's punishments, against the cruelty passed down from throne to world, against the silence ended by power. For this, Zeus did not kill him, he unmade him, a spell cast in fury, more cursed than justice, that Apollo was stripped of his form, his voice, his divinity forced into the body of a swan, not to teach him humility, but to remind him he could glow like Thesan and still be caged by shadow. Thecarus was crueler still. There was one condition: if a mortal ever discovered his true identity, the transformation will become permanent. And so Apollo waited years, centuries, lifetimes, floating on lakes, hiding beneath stars, watching mortals forget his temples, forget his hymns, watching the world grow colder as the gods withdrew, until Leonthi, her presence cracked something inside him, something buried so deep even Olympus had forgotten. He texted hope. He never meant to be seen, never meant to stay. But Cher turned again and again, and her voice when she spoke to him in Theglade was the only thing that made the fire inside him flicker again. She was not a priestess, not a nymph, not a Kosan oracle. She was a warrior with hands that knew only weapons, a woman hardened by loss and trained to feel nothing. And yet, she saw him. She treated him not as a symbol or a threat, but as something sacred, something worth waiting for. He dared not speak, dared not reveal his name, but in the tilt of his head, in the stillness of his body, he answered every question. She never asked, and slowly, impossibly, he loved her back. In Sparta, solitude was respected but not for too long. Leonthi's absence did not get noticed. Each full moon, she slipped away from the barracks, from the training fields, from the watchful eyes of commanders and kin. At first none questioned her. She was Leonthi, untouchable, unshakable, the warrior whose loyalty was carved into every scar. But Sparta hath revved on order, on discipline, and love, especially the hidden kind, was a foreign thing in a city built on control. Whispers began. She wanders. She speaks less in council. She trains, but her strikes lack venom. It which truly Anthea had changed. Her movements were still sharp, but no longer cruel. Her voice no longer cute, and something in her eyes softened. Knights, she smiled to herself, as if holding a secret the gods themselves couldn't steal. Her father noticed first. Commander Adrastos Emanwo's face bore no softness, whose daughters were meant to lead men, not follow feelings. He summoned her Onovaning under the guise of strategy. But when the chamber emptied, he spoke plainly. What keeps you from sleep? Leonthe offered no answer. Do not forget who you are. But she already had at least the version of herself that Sparta had molded. What the city had built in stone, a swan had touched with water, and Leonthe found herself unwilling to return to who she'd been. Still, Sparta watched. A patrol once followed her out beyond the walls, tracing her steps toward their cliffs. They lost her near the olive groves. She was too skilled to be shouted, but it was enough. Enough. Tobert's priests murmured about omens, that the moonlight carried voices. Bath lakes beyond Sparta stirred ancestrally. A warrior woman disappearing each full moon. Bayfared it was madness, or worse, a god. Leonthe knew. The walls were closing in. They were learning to look where before they had looked away. That her silence and strength now made her vulnerable, but still she went. Still she found him. And in that grove where moonlight ouched feather, she forgot the noise of Sparta, forgot the rules, forgot the danger. Only one thing mattered now, a scene, because if the world discovered what she knew in her heart, it would destroy them both. The moon was Shivi that night, low, swollen, golden as a dying. Leonthe stood in her chamber, fingers trembling over her armor. Unablato fastened the final clasp. Something had changed. She had felt it for days, Aqueot trembling beneath her feet. Liketh ground itself knew what she did not. The swan had been different. On their last meeting, restless, more watchful. Its feathers bristled when the wind shifted. It had circled her twice, Betha settling at her side. Its warmth sharpened it off, soothing. That night, sleep eluded her, and when it came, it brought visions. She stood in a silver grove, her hands covered in gold dust. A statue loomed before her. Part man, part swan, its wings frozen mid-beat, its face serene and lifeless. She reached out, called Annam. She didn't know she knew. Apollo. The statue cracked and a voice jewed, not from the sky, but from inside her bones. Truth will freeze what love has kindled. She awoke breathless, heart racing, the name still burning on her tongue. She tried to dismiss it. Adream, nothing more. But warriors know when fear is real, and this was an ordinary omen. This was. The next day, Leonthe left Sparta earlier than usual, the ache in her chest sharper with every step. She didn't follow her usual path. Her feet led her deeper into the hills, through trees she'd never passed, into groves untouched by. There, hidden beneath a curtain of ivy and moss, she found the altar, ancient, cracked, marked with a single, unmistakable inscription, carved in old flaking gold. Apollon, her breath itched. All at once, the pieces fell into place. The warmth of the swan, its listening gaze, the dreams, the curse in her bones, the reason it had always come during the full moon. He wasn't just enchanted, he was a god. Her god, and she had broken something. She stumbled back, the sound of feathers behind her. The swan had followed her, silent as always, but its stillness no longer comforted her. It was watching sadly, softly, as if it already knew, as if the truth had arrived. And so had the end. The grove was no longer still. The air pulsed slow and deep, like the breath of something ancient stirring in its sleep. Moonlight trembled on the surface of Thelic. The trees leaned in, silent witnesses to the unraveling of a secret had survived centuries. Leonthe stood frozen before the altar. The name, Apollo, still echoed in her mind like a spear striking stone. She turned slowly, as if doing so would unmake the truth, but it was too late. The swan wasted there, not gliding, not graceful, just standing, watching. Its feathers no longer shimmered, its glow dimmed, flickering like a dying flame. Leonthe stepped toward it, her lips parted, unsure what to say, unsure if anything could be said. I know, she whispered. The wind stilled. A single feather drifted from the swan's back, falling slowly, silently before vanishing into dust. The moment it touched the altar, Anthon, the change began. The swan's neck arched, not in grace, but in agony. Its body trembled. Feathers unraveled into streams of golden light. Wings bent into arms. Webbed feet split into toes that dug into Theathin where the swan had stood. Now knelt a man, naked, radiant, broken. Apollo. His hair shimmered like the sky at dawn. His skin glowed faintly, like embers beneath marble. But his eyes, high eyes, were dimmed by sorrow, by inevitability. Leonthe stepped back, hand to her mouth. She had loved him insolence, and now silence had become unbearable. He tried to speak, but Decorus had not fully lifted. His voice cracked like thunder in a storm. "To old to a name you weren't supposed to know," he said at last. Voice barely more than wind. It was the only rule. She fell to her knees beside him, tears cutting down her warrior's face like rivers through mountain stone. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. He smiled, then just once. A god's smile, not of joy, but a farewell, "I know." And with that, the ground beneath them shuddered a soundless quake. A divine sentence passed without mercy. His glow faded, his skin hardened, his limbs stiffened mid. Apollo was turning to stone, and Leonthe could only watch as love became lit the moment the name was spoken. The curse began its final work. Apollo's body, once fluid with divinity, now stiffened inch by inch. The light beneath his skin dulled. Like cooling metal, his golden hair lost its luster, hardening into marble threads as Stephanal phase of Zeus's punishment took hold. There would be no forgiveness nor approval. Leonthe grasped his hands, still warm, still trembling, but she could feel it, the stone creeping like frost over flesh. His fingers curled around hers one last time before they've stopped moving altogether. She shook her head. No, this can't be how it ends. But the curse didn't listen. It had waited centuries in silence, patient and cruel. Apollo's chest rose once more, Anthon didn't. His wings half-formed behind his shoulders froze mid-fold. His knees bent in grief, locked in place. His face, still beautiful, still kind, was caught between love and pain. His eyes open but unseeing, and thensilence, a quiet deeper than the moments bore the charge. This was not thistleance of peace, but of loss. Of something sacred shattered. Leonthe knelt there, forehead prosecco, his now cold hand, a hand that once cradled stars, now nothing more. Fanstone, her tears slid down the side, off his marble fingers and fell to the earth, one after another, slow and steady as a funeral march. The grove dimmed, even the moon, so often bright and watchful, seemed to draw back behind a veil of cloud. No lightning came, no god appeared because the punishment was done. Zeus had spoken. The swan had flown for the last time, and Apollo, god of light, was now a statue of silence, forever frozen in the moment of his. Leonthe stayed long after Thea's transformation finished, arms wrapped around what remained. She did not scream, she did not curse the heavens. There were no Spartans to hear her cries, no warriors to bear witness, only the trees, and the stone figure of a god who had once loved her, not with thunder and fire, but with stillness, and now with silence. Leanne never returned to Sparta. She left her armor where it lay beside Thealtar, removed her sword, let her war-bound name drift away like smoke over the lake. The woman who had once stood tall among kings now knelt in silence beside a statue that would never move. Gain the grove, but it became her world. Each full moon, she returned, never missing a single one. She brought no offerings, no incense, no prayers, just herself and Amory. She would sit beside the statue of Apollo, fingers brushing the cold stone hand she once held in flesh. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she hummed a song he'd never heard but somehow felt like it belonged to both of them. Other times she simply watched the water and said nothing. The vloggers began to whisper. They said a woman haunted the hills, that she wanted moonlight with eyes like distant stars. Some said she had gone mad. Others said she had been chosen, but no one dared disturb her. Years passed. Winters came and went, empires shifted, gods fell silent, but Leonthe remained. She grew older but frail. Her strength endured, less like a soldier, more like the roots of an olive tree clinging to the same patch of earth year after year, storm after storm, and still the statue stood. Apollo mid-kneel, wings half-formed behind him, gaze fixed on the space where Leonthe always sat, a moment frozen in marble, untouched by time. Some travelers claimed that the stone was warm to touch, that if you placed your hand against his chest, you could feel something faint, like a heartbeat from a dream. And then, one final full moon, Leonthe came. She sat beside him longer than usual, laid her head gently on his shoulder and never moved. And when the villagers came weeks later, they found her there, peaceful, eyes closed, lips curled faintly in asthma. Beside her, Apollo's statue shimmered faintly as if lit from within. No one touched it. They built no temple. But the legend grew, and now when the moon is full and Thuond is still, some say the swan returns to the lake, not to be seen. But Torimempo Melania was not born under a palace roof or amidst temple incense. He came into the world beneath a willow tree during a storm that split the sky in two. His mother, a midwife's daughter, swaddled him in a linen robe as thunder rolled. Over the hills, birds scattered, the rain danced, and Vetchel did not cry. He hummed. From the moment he could walk. Music followed him. Streams whisper idelities when he knelt to drink. Leaves trembled in harmony as he passed. Hadn't need instruction. Sound belonged him. By 10, he could mimic any bird call and weave it into song. By 16, he played the lyre with such grace they Tevan-hardened warriors paused to listen. He sang of rivers, of lost brothers, our fields before war, songs that filled men's eyes with tears they didn't know they had. People called him a gift, a child of divine breath, and never claimed it. Melanian traveled from village to village, sharing his music without coin or pride. His voice calmed fevers, his chords softened heart and hurts. He once played for a dying child woe upon hearing his lute, smiled and drifted into death as if it were age. But not all ears that listen out were mortal. One spring evening, as he sat beside a glimmering river and strummed a tune about starlight, the very air around him changed. The wind slowed, the water stilled, even the frogs silenced their song. And then they arrived, the muses. 9 of them, stepping lightly from behind the veil of the world. Cloaked in light and sound, each carried her own history, tragedy, dance, epic poetry, and more. Their eyes were not kind, not cruel, just knowing. They listened, and then to Melanian Sastanism. They sang back. Nina voices in perfect harmony. Older than languid Melanian closed his eyes and without thought joined them. His voice didn't echo theirs. It evolved them. When the last note fell into silence, even the stars seemed closer. One of Themis's Coley, eldest and most stern, touched his brow. "You are no Tadinary," she said. "You are a vessel." And thus began the legend of Melania, the bard whose voice would shake the Hevons. From that night on, Melanaron's no longer just a gifted mortal he was touched, marked, whispered about. The Muses had chosen him. In the quiet folds of Mount Hell, where few dared to tread, they invited him into their sacred circle. There beneath, ancient trees and skies unclouded by mortal ambition, Melanian learned not through lectures but Coley muse of epic taught them how to bend a story into sound. Cleo whispered the histories of nations into his ears as he slept. Terpsora danced barefoot through leaves while he played beside her, his fingers learning Thurhitham of wind and body. Ute laid her flute across his palm and said only, "Listen," and he did. He absorbed not just melodies but truths, the kind that lived between words, the kind that mortals rarely noticed but felt. In Thehush before a storm, in the echo, in the gasp of a child at first snowfall, the Muses gave him not power but perspective, and they asked for only one thing in return: sing for them. The meaning mortals, the lost, the weary, the proud and broken. Those who needed to remember that beauty still existed bend in suffering. That song could Bebath Balm and Blade out at first. Melanian obeyed. He performed in city forums and quiet fields, played bare kings and beggars alike. His songs stitched broken hearts, stirred revolutions, mended fathers to daughters and enemies to uneasy peace. But as his gift grew, so did some Thingle's ambition. He began chasing sounds the Muses hadn't taught, notes no god had touched. In the stillest parts of the night, he would write alone, drafting fragments of something beyond language, a song that could bend time, still the wind, and bring tears, tossed in a final song. He told no one notive in the Muses, because some part of him longer wanted to share the divine he wanted to surpass it, and the Muses, ever watchful, saw the change, not in his fingers, but in his eyes. The way he looked beyond them, as if destiny out him, more demolition, and in the distance, fate stirred slightly. Because no mortal walks beside the divine forever. Without coast, Melania withdrew from the world. He left behind the applause, their requests, the gifts from kings, and the adoration of cities. He stopped performing in public, stopped teaching students, even stopped speaking to Themoses. Some claimed he had fallen ill, others said he had died. But in truth he had gone to the shadowed slopes of Mount Helicon, deeper than any mortal had ever gone, where only echoes of the old gods stirred. There, in a cave lined with crystals that sang when touched by light, he began composing the final song. It came to him in pieces, sometimes in sleep, sometimes in thunder, sometimes in silence so deep it frightened him. He didn't write it, heft it like a secret hidden between folds of reality. The melody Refuseto stays still. It changed when he breathed, twisted with his heartbeat. It was not a song for performance, it weighs truth in sound. He heard the birth of stars in its opening note. He felt the deaths of empires in its fall. It was not sad, it was not joyful, it simply weighs. He labored for months, maybe years. Time bent strangely inside the cave. Heat little, slept only when the music hallowed it. He would weep one moment, laugh the next, as though the song played through his soul instead of Hishan's. And when it was finished, Thule changed. Birds stopped mid-flight, trees leaned toward. The windless mountain streams went quiet. The sky itself held its breath. And far above, in the marble chambers of Olympus, Thegods turned their heads. Even the Fates, who never looked away from their weaving, paused. Cloth whispered, a thread trembles. Lysos frowned, and Atropos, whose shears never hesitated, set them down. They listened. The song did not demand worship, it did not beg to be loved. It simply revealed everything. When Thephanal note faded, even the cave Refusedo echoed it. As if the world knew torpeded would be a crime, the gods waited, the Muses waited. They expected Melian to return to offer this wonder to the world, but he didn't. He hid it. And in doing so, he set a different music in motion, one of silence and consequences. When Melania emerged from the cave, the world felt smaller. Beski's once so vast seemed pale, Bezadeth echoes of the song still humming in his bones. People rushed to greet him, musicians, poets, even priests. They begged to hear what he had written to feel whatever power had moved the Hyvans. But Melania said nothing. They asked again. He smiled faintly, not yet. Only the Muses saw the shift. They came to him one dusk, stepping from starlight like breath from a lyre. Their robes glowed with inspiration, but their eyes held warning. You were chosen to carry beauty, Satrato, soft and sorrowful. But beauty is not meant to be buried, added Cleo. Who must sing it, whispered Calliope. Melanian bowed his head. I will not see it cheapened. They flinched, as if he'd struck them. You think mortals unworthy, Terpsy asked, voice trembling. You think you alone are its guardian? He met their eyes not with rage but with something cold of possession. Yes, silence felt like winter. between them. Then you are no longer ours, said Calliope. Not because you created something beyond us, but because you hoard it. He said nothing, and they vanished. Still, the gods waited. Even Zeus, who rarely concerned himself with mortal affairs, paused to listen. Even Hades tilted his head in the depths. They waited for a single note, a whisper, a fragment. Nothing came. Milanion kept the song locked inside himself. Not written, not recorded, not shared. He called it sacred, but sacred things, when sealed too long, begin to sour. He performed the pieces. They were still beautiful. Audiences wept. Crowds cheered. But he knew, and so did the divine. Something was missing, and worse, something had been stolen. The song that could stir fates, bend time, and touch the gods themselves was buried beneath his pride. He told himself he protected it, but the muses, watching from afar, saw the truth. He had chained the divine to his ego, and the gods who endure madness, war, and worship without linking do not abide theft. And so one night the wind turned still, the stars went quiet, and the curse began to bloom. Not with fire, but with memory. Thickers came softly, no thunder, from Olympus, just a dream. Milanion lay beneath an open sky, cradled in the same silence he had once treasured. Sleep pulled him gently into darkness, and there, waiting, was Thesong, the final song. It returned, clearer, richer, impossibly perfect. He'd heard notes he'd never written, harmonies he hadn't yet imagined. It lifted him through stars, wove him intuitions, unspooled the very fabric of meaning. He wept in joy, in awe, in surrender, and then morning, gone, not faded, erased. No memory, not a note, not a name. The melody he'd written with his soul, felt in his bones, was gone like mist at sunrise. At first he thought it a cruel trick of sleep. He grabbed his lyre and tried to recollect in a single progression. Nothing. He strummed Willie off-key, frantic. Nothing. That night, he returned to his bed early, heart pounding, and the song returned, more radiant than ever. He sang along, nth dream, tears streaming, fingers staining through light. It felt real, heckled, remember it within the dream. Buttons again. With dawn's first breath gone, Melania began keeping candles lit through the night, scribbling notes in dark. He begged his mind to retain aphrase, a rhythm, a single image. But no matter what he tried, it vanished again and again and again. He stopped playing, refused to perform. Crowds dwindled, friends left. His home grew dusty and cold, but none of it mattered. He had no obsession now. Remember the song? The muses stood at a distance, watching with sorrow. He was given a gift, Sadoterp, and he chose to cage it. Now Hay's the only one who will hear. It's Sate Polyhymnia, and never remember, whispered Cleo. It was not vengeance, it was balance. Milanion would hear Thesong every night for eternity, but it would live only in dreams. Each sunrise it would slip through his grasp like water through cracked hands. He would never stop chasing it, never stop fainting, and in time, hope would rot into madness, because what torments a bard more than forgetting the greatest song ever knew, and knowing it still sings with Altham? Melania stopped counting the nights. They bled into each other, an endless loop of ecstasy and loss. Each varning he slipped into, dreams where Thephanel's song embraced him like a lover turned from war, and each dawn he woke alone, screaming, weeping blank. At first he tried to outwit the curse. He hired scribes to sleep beside him, begged seers to extract fragments from his mind. He sang to mirrors, hoping his own voice would betray some hidden memory. Nothing worked, and slowly he began to fray. He stopped eating. His robes hung from a body gone hollow. His fingers trembled when he reached for his lyre, the same instrument he once cradled like he a child. Strings snapped under his aching hands. He didn't fix them, he didn't need them anymore, because in sleep the music still came. It became his only purpose, the only place he felt at all, and waking became a punishment. He cursed the sun, smashed his windows, sealed himself in a room with no light. But still the song left with them. When he emerged, he no longer resembled a bard. He was wild-eyed, gaunt, his once golden voice now roared from nights of desperate humming. He wandered from village to village like Abigail, not for coin, but for memory. Have you heard it? He'd ask, the song with no beginning and no end. Have you heard it in your sleep? People pied him at first, then feared him. Some threw stones, others fooled. He began to sing fragments in thestrites, random frantic bursts of melody. They made no sense to others, but to him they were clues, keys, pieces of a shattered mirror he could almost reassemble. But every time it slipped through his fingers, he laughed at one, he failed, then cried, then laughed at again. And every night the song came back, shimmering, whole, just out of reach. The muses watched, not Withinger with morning. He had once been Thea's finest vessel. Now he was a cracked jar, overflowing only when no one could hear. And in that descent, Thesong he'd hoarded became the thing that unraveled him. Not with fire, not with wrath, but with silence. Milanion no longer lived in the world. His body walked through it, yes, but his mind was elsewhere, caught between dreams and daylight, past and present. A song only he could hear, and only when it was too late to hold. He wandered barefoot through cities. Thatans hosted him like royalty. Childreno once sat at his feet, now ran from his shadow. His name once sung in praise become a warning. Don't end up like Milanion. He slept where he could, under trees, in empty chapels, sometimes in doorways of inns whose keepers once begged for his presence. He no longer asked for food, only a place to rest, only the dream. The curse never failed. Each night he fell asleep with trembling hope, and the final song returned, told, alive, a perfect ghost. And each morning he woke to forgetting. The cruelty wasn't in the silence, it was an nth memory of sound. He remembered Thoth had heard something transcendent, that it had meant everything. But Heckled no longer remembered why. He began speaking to shadows, to trees, to Thestus sometimes. He would sing to strangers and demand they sing back, convinced the melody was hiding in Samian Elsa's throat. Once he believed a child had hummed it in passing. Hef allowed the family across to Villiger's bore, collapsing in the dust, begging the boy to sing again. But the sound had been something else, something ordinary. He wept for hours and still each night's song returned, taunting, embracing, divine. He tried to hum it as Head dreamed, tried to wake mid-melody, but Curse was clever. He could not move within the dream. He could not record it, write it, carry it, only hear it, and when he woke, emptiness. Some who saw him said he still hummed in his, that if you placed your ear near his mouth at midnight, you could hear a music unlike any other. But only then, only in darkness. The muses no longer came. The gods stopped watching, and Melanian, once the voice of the world, now wandered like an echo of a song Thrill could no longer remember, and Heckled no longer forget. Melania had grown thin as twilight. His skin, once kissed by golden light, was now pale and paper-thin. His voice, what remained of it, was hoarser from years of whispers and wandering. He no longer searched for food, shelter, or even the song. Assembly walked one evening. He reached Acliff overlooking the sea. It was quieter, no towns, no roads, no rose eyes, just the wind, the waves, and Thestus slowly rising in the deepening blue. He sat curled against a stone, the sea breeze tangling what remained of his hair. He didn't weep, he didn't sing, he simply closed his eyes, and Thedrim came again. But this time, something was different. There was no delay, no mist to wade through, no struggle to hear. The final song wasted the air from the beginning, full and clear. But it was not just sound, it was a place, a presence, a world built from music. Melania stood within it, barefoot on chords that bent like grass, stars pulsing above in rhythm. The sky was a symphony, the wind sang in harmony. And he was not just hearing it, he was part of it. His own voice joined its song, and it did not tremble. It did not forget, it soared. He saw every note High had lost, every phrase he'd mourned, but now he understood. The song had never left him. It had grown without him. It had become more than his hand-scaled hold. He was not its owner. He was its witness. And in that final dream, there was no sorrow, no shame, no punishment, only release. When the sun rose, Melania did not stir. The wind lifted softly around his body as if carrying away a final breath. A shepherd passing the cliffs found him later, peaceful, hands resting in his chest, as if cradling an invisible lyre. There was no scroll nor recording, but above him, high in the coastal sky, seabirds flew in strange formations, almost like they danced to something only they could hear. And Thesia for a moment sang, not in words, not in melody, but in something older Thanatha, something he had Melania was buried beneath a lone olive tree near the cliff where Hellas slept. No priest performed their rites, no crowds gathered, just Theshaford who found him and a few villagers who remembered the stories. Faint echoes of the bard who once met the gods pause mid-breath. There was no but silence has a way of amplifying truth. In the years that followed, strange things were whispered across the land. Travelers claimed that if you passed that cliff under a new moon, you might hear a melody in brief, fleeting, heartbreaking lutea, not a full song, just a note, just enough to make you stop. Children began dreaming of music they'd never heard. Musicians would wake in the night with tears on their cheeks and no memory of why. And sometimes, when a bard sat alone at dusk with no audience, a sudden chord would form beneath their fingers. Something not his, something perfect. They never remembered it by morning. The muses said nothing. They did not curse another bard. They did not reclaim the song because they understood what Melanian had become. Not a warning, not a hero, but a vessel turned legend. A soul whose punishment was born not of cruelty but of refusal, and whose redemption came not through sharing but surrender. The final song was never written down. It was never performed in amphitheaters or temples. It does no text in scroll or scripture, but it lives in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, in the hush before a performer strums their first chord. In the way the sea sounds different when you're grieving, Melanian song became part of the world itself, not to be remembered but to be felt. A whisper in the bones, a melody without words. And those who feel it even for a moment never forget the silence that follows. They say if you stand alone on the right cliff on the right night, with no one watching and the wind is kind, you might hear a sound that doesn't belong to this, just a fragment, just a breath. And maybe if you listen closely enough, you'll finally understand why Millennium never let it go.